This is Idiot with a Library Card, and on this episode I'm going to be taking a look at Lessons, the 2022 novel by Ian McEwan. I think this will be the smallest gap between a book coming out and me recording a show about it. It's pretty rare I read new books, and the books I really like doing shows on tend to be at least 5 to 10 years older. But I started reading this book, and I just thought it was great. It's a beautifully prosed book. Although I may not read this book again, I'm definitely going to read another Ian McEwan novel. Now, to get down to the book, because I have a lot to talk about, the novel is, as the author called it, it's a whole life novel. And I was searching to see if there was like a more technical term for this type of novel. But since the author called it a whole life novel, I was thinking that's good enough for me. And what's meant by a whole life novel is that the novel starts early in the protagonist's childhood and ends up going through their whole life. So I want to start by reading the inside cover of the book. I just think it's really informative. And I've seen a few talks from the author, and I think this summary does a good job not only summarizing the plot, but also alluding to what the author is going for in the novel. Quote, "From the best-selling author of Atonement and Saturday comes the epic and intimate story of one man's life across generations and historical upheavals. From the Suez Crisis to the Cuban Missile Crisis, the fall of the Berlin Wall to the current pandemic, Roland Baines sometimes rides the tide of history, but more often struggles against it. When the world is still counting the cost of the Second World War and the Iron Curtain has closed, 11-year-old Roland Baines' life is turned upside down. 2,000 miles from his mother's protective love, stranded at an unusual boarding school, his vulnerability attracts piano teacher Miss Miriam Cornell, leaving scars as well as a memory of love that will never fade. Now, when his wife vanishes, leaving him alone with his tiny son, Roland is forced to confront the reality of his restless existence. As the radiation from Chernobyl spreads across Europe, he begins a search for answers that look deep into his family's history and will last the rest of his life. Haunted by lost opportunities, Roland seeks solace through every possible means: music, literature, friends, sex, politics, and finally, love, cut tragically short, then love ultimately redeemed. His journey raises important questions for us all. Can we take full charge of the course of our lives without causing damage to others? How do global events beyond our control shape our lives and our memories? And what can we really learn from the traumas of the past? Epic, mesmerizing, and deeply humane, Lessons is a chronicle for our times. A powerful meditation on history and humanity through the prism of one man's lifetime. End quote. Sorry, I get so sarcastic when I read these things. I would say it's a good summary to explain the plot. I think it oversells the book a little, but we'll get into that. So first off, he struggles against the tide of history. Okay, I guess so, but not really. As a protagonist, he's very passive. More often, things happen to Roland than the other way around. He doesn't make things happen. So from the summary, the story really starts at a piano lesson at Roland's boarding school. He is sent to a boarding school because his father's a colonel in the army. And basically this is what is done. The Suez crisis kind of forces Roland away from, he's in Libya at the time, like stationed with his father in the army, but they send him back to England to go to boarding school. Basically, there's a piano lesson, and the piano teacher touches him inappropriately. She kisses him. I would say she grooms him. That's kind of what she does. She gives him her address to come to her house sometime. He's 11 at the time, but he doesn't go. Then, a few years later, the Cuban Missile Crisis happens. And so he's 14 at the time, and he's worried that he's going to die without having sex first. So he goes to the piano teacher's house, and they actually start up a sexual relationship. This, to me, is one of the most interesting things this book does. The exploration of a boy being molested by a woman at this age, at like a teenage boy being molested by an older woman, is really well explored in this novel, and I think done tastefully. It's an interesting aspect of the novel and the effect it has on Roland later on in his life. I would say that there are 3 major women characters in the book, and I guess a quick observation, kind of, none of the 3 are his mom, so he has kind of a distant relationship from his parents. And the first relationship is the piano teacher. So after he goes to her house that first time, they basically carry on a sexual relationship for the next 2 years. Part of the aspect of this relationship is that he becomes a really good piano player, because one of the things they do when they get together is they practice the piano, and he gets really good and really accomplished. And it ends up kind of being his job later on. He plays the piano at like a hotel lobby, but it ends up being a big part of his life is playing the piano. But basically, as you look into this relationship, it's an interesting look into what a relationship like this, I guess, sometimes does and could look like. He gets to the heart of what a female predator would look like in this, and kind of how you can contrast it to how a male predator would approach a situation like this. But basically, this relationship really has a big effect on him. And at 16, she suggests that he basically drop out of school and they get married. They can go up to Scotland, because Scotland, the age of consent is 16. She suggests they both go up there and they can get married. And basically, live together forever. He finally is like, no, I can't do that. So he leaves, and basically that's the last time they see each other until later on in the book. And the thing is, he has, like, after they break up, he does drop out of school, and he basically has like a lost decade in his life where he just kind of travels around Europe. He gets good at tennis, but he does a lot of drugs and kind of just is backpacking all over the place. He almost had to re-find himself. Like, he lost those teenage years and had to kind of relive them. But later on in the novel, a policeman comes to talk to him about the molestation, because there were rumors and innuendo going around about this piano teacher and his relationship. Towards the end of the novel, he actually does confront the piano teacher that was molesting him. And it's a really interesting scene. She gives her side of the story, and he decides not to follow up. He actually has like pity on her and feels bad, like would feel bad about sending her to jail. It's just a really interesting look at that relationship. Although it is rare, it's more rare how we look as a society at older women molesting teenage boys. I think there's, I don't want to say a stigma, but it just seems like our reaction is milder to it. But it's just an interesting look at that aspect inside of child molestation. I just thought it was an interesting aspect of the novel that was explored really well. So a little later on, he ends up finding love again. And this would be the second important woman in his life. He gets married to this German woman, and they have a son together named Lawrence. But shortly after the birth of Lawrence, the German wife disappears. She doesn't really leave like a note or, hey, I can't take it anymore or anything. She just one day is there and the next day is gone. She disappears so well to the point where, and I found this part kind of odd. I think it was just so the author could inject some thoughts and philosophies that he wanted to put in the book. And so he had the police officer be a person that would say it. But the wife disappears so well that Roland is getting investigated for murder. And it's weird because he doesn't murder her and she becomes a very famous author. She disappears so well. The police couldn't track her down. It was funny to me, but basically his wife leaves and she breaks off all contact with Roland. She wants nothing to do with her son. And as I said, she then becomes a famous writer. This may be my least favorite aspect of the novel. She leaves because she felt like she could not be a great author and a mother at the same time. To me, it's dumb. It's this like artsy-fartsy talk about the true artist and stuff like that. And I don't have time for it. And I'm sure there are some female authors who are also mothers. I don't know. The one interesting thing that comes out of this storyline, and I would say this is kind of the main storyline, I really found this view of it, is basically Roland goes to a talk later. Roland gets real into reading books and gets actually he really enjoys his ex-wife's work. But he goes to a talk, like just a book talk, and they talk about how if female authors abandon their children, like I guess Hemingway did, or some other male authors who would have a bunch of different kids with different women, how if women did that, they would be viewed differently. And it's funny because in the book, his wife doesn't really pay a penalty for abandoning her children. Like, no one cares. In some corners of the literary world, they think her abandoning her child was like a win for feminism. And it's interesting, like she almost gets credited in a positive way for abandoning her husband and her child. I just thought that him exploring that angle was really interesting. It's not prominent in the story. It's not something they go in depth with, but it's talked about briefly in one part of the novel, and I just really enjoyed that little sidetrack, that little philosophical mind game. And this book has a lot of that, which I enjoy. Part of the plot is that Roland's ex-wife, her mother was going to be a writer, was working to be a writer, and then basically got married and got pregnant with the German ex-wife. She then couldn't be a writer, and the ex-wife always felt like her mother took it out on her. And frankly, Roland's wife, the German writer, she's the heel of the story. And I think there's supposed to be like a nuanced feeling towards her, but I just think she's an all-around terrible person. The second problem with this storyline, it doesn't really satisfy. What I mean is that Roland gets to have a moment with the piano teacher, and it's really powerful. Roland and his wife's meeting is supposed to be the climax of the novel, and it just failed to deliver for me. I just feel like she never got that slap down talking to, and this aspect also made me dislike Roland a lot. I think the protagonist, Roland, is my least favorite part of the book. Roland has no religion or philosophy. He never really fights for anything. He just kind of has things happen to him and reacts to them. The happiest and saddest part of the book is when he basically hooks up with like an old girlfriend who he lived with for a while after his wife left him. Her name's Daphne, and she had children from another guy, and he had Lawrence, and they kind of lived, but they never actually like made it official or moved in. So he never took the leap and took a chance with her. And eventually she went back to her baby daddy. But they break up a little later on. And her and Roland hook back up. And he proposes to her, finally. And a few days later, they find out she's sick with cancer. And she dies a few months later. It goes into those last few months. And it's just a really beautiful and touching part of the book. Honestly, I was starting to think maybe this book wasn't going to get finished. And this part of the book happens, I'd say, in the last third. And it really just gives the novel and even the character of Roland some nice depth. And this is one of the places I really like Roland. And I don't know, maybe this is the point of the book, that to feel like he's so passive throughout, and finally he makes a decision and it works out for him, even though it sounds like it doesn't. The aspects of love and loss are dealt with very beautifully, and this is where Ian McEwan is just a really great writer. In the summary I read, they give you 3 questions that this book is supposed to address. Can we take full charge of the course of our lives without causing damage to others? The other questions are, how do global events beyond our control shape our lives and our memories? And what can we really learn from the traumas of the past? One of my issues is that these questions this book definitely is trying to answer. The answers, and frankly the questions in relation to the book, are the least interesting aspects of the novel. The first question is a question asked by people who have a real lack of religion in their lives. And really, it seems like no one in the novel has really strong convictions. There's a lot about politics, and Roland seems to care a little. His politics change a little, but it's basically he just rolls with the London upper middle class politics all throughout the novel. He's right in the center of the Labour Party, and that's the beliefs Roland has. He is kind of the popular BBC would want you to have beliefs. I assume, and I don't know Ian McEwan, I assume he basically has the same politics Ian McEwan and his circle in London have. And this is where the character is really shallow. His beliefs, his life philosophy just never really fully forms. And again, there just seems to be no sort of strong convictions. There's also, and this happens in a lot of writings, but there's he has nothing bad to say about labor politicians or Democrats when mentioning America, and only bad things to say about Tories and Republicans. And it's tiresome. But past that, the global event aspect to this novel is another weak part of the novel. I tend to be a trend and forces guy when it comes to history. But more than that, when it comes to how someone's life turns out or their ability to control it, I'm weary of pointing to global events that change people's lives if you're not directly a part of the global event. I didn't live for most of these events mentioned in the novel, or if I was alive, I don't remember them. And the novel really didn't make me feel closer to them. I think the author wanted to show people how global events affect individuals, but it didn't work for me. These events are good to use to tell us where, where you are in the timeline. It's 1989 when the Berlin Wall is coming down, so you can use it to kind of set the scene of the time. But in this book, it's used as a catalyst for a lot of events in Roland's life. And honestly, it took me out of the novel. Roland's in Berlin when the wall's coming down. And he actually runs into his baby mama there. And at this point, she has been gone. I think Lawrence, the son, is 5 years old. She's been gone for 4 or 5 years. The Berlin Wall coming down in the background of these two characters meeting is more distracting to me than anything else. There's a focus on Chernobyl. I don't see how it actually changes Roland's life. It's just kind of happening in the background. I just find that this is the part of the novel that bothers me the most. And I guess, again, there is just such a lack of religious thought in this book. And I guess for people who aren't super religious, these large-scale events, I think they mean something more to the secular society. The last aspect and that kind of last question is, how does trauma shape us, is an interesting aspect and one I really enjoyed. I actually just wish it was more part of the story. I wish that was more of the focus of the novel. And there's a few aspects that you can explore. There's a Roland being molested is a trauma, but also Lawrence being left by his mother. And I would say that's one of the aspects of the novel I really feel is not explored enough. And then the aspect of, how does a parent absorb trauma of their children that's outside of their control? It's just, these were things that weren't explored. And again, I'm not Ian McEwan, genius, brilliant writer. I'm an idiot with a library card. So far be it for me to say, you should have done this with your novel. But it's just, I would have liked some of the other aspects not explored because it's not interesting. The historical events part to me is like, yeah, these things happen, but people's lives are shaped by the things that are going on around them. I just wish there was more focus on those things because I think the writing is really beautiful and the characters could be interesting. With all that said, I do want to read 3 excerpts from the book. I don't do this enough on this show, and when I really like writing, I should show examples, and I just want to read 3 quick quotes from the book just to give you a sample of the writing, because I think that's the strongest part of the book, is the prose itself. From the opening of the book. This was an insomniac memory, not a dream. It was the piano lesson again. An orange-tiled floor, one high window, a new upgrade in a bare room close to the sick bay. He was 11 years old. Attempting what others might know as Bach's First Prelude from Book 1 of the Well-Tempered Clavier, simplified version. But he knew nothing of that. He didn't wonder whether it was famous or obscure. It had no when or where. He could not conceive that someone had once troubled to write it. The music was simply here. A school thing, or dark, like a pine forest in winter. Exclusive to him, his private labyrinth of cold sorrow. It could never let him leave. The teacher sat close by him, on the long stool, round-faced, erect, perfumed, strict. Her beauty lay concealed behind her manner. She never scowled or smiled. Some boys said she was mad, but he doubted that. End quote. The opening of this book is quite beautiful, and I think that's what really hooked me in. This is another short philosophical avenue that really isn't explored past here, but I like this quote, and I wanted to read it. Quote, in the spring of 97, there was a death in Roland's family. Once, no one advanced far through childhood without confronting a dead person. But in the prosperous West, after the mass carnage of 2 world wars, to live without death became the particular privilege and vulnerability of a protected generation. Loud and hungry for sex and goods and much else, it was squeamish about extinction. Again, neat thought, and just kind of liked it. It's a good quote. And the last one I also really like. This is about the death of his fiancée, and I thought this was a beautiful part too. The months that separated diagnosis and death were the most intense in Roland's life. At a few points, the happiest, and during the rest, the most miserable. He had never felt so much. After the immediate shock and terror, she had arranged a second opinion. He went with her and took notes while she asked the questions they had worked on together. It seemed so abstract, she kept telling him. She was feeling nothing unusual apart from an occasional pain in her side, which she rated for the consultant at 3, on a scale of 0 to 10. They were married in a registry office, with no family or friends present. Only a couple of witnesses plucked from the street. For days, they talked over consultation and the results of a further set of tests. Then, over the consultation and the results, then she made her decision. She summoned her children, including Lawrence, to Lloyd Square and broke the news. That rated high among the worst events. 10 on the pain spectrum. Gerald, recently qualified for medical school, went quiet and left the room. Greta wept. Nancy got angry, with her mother's news and with her mother. Lawrence put his arm around Daphne, and both cried. End quote. So yeah, this book is really great, and I would totally recommend it. Obviously, I had some issues with it, mostly the plotting, and I would say I'm looking forward to reading another Ian McEwan novel, and I hope I've been saying his name right, because if I haven't, I'm going to sound like an idiot. Thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment wherever you get your podcasts, and hope to be coming out with a new episode shortly.